So we're here in Wenatchee, Washington, and here in Wenatchee, it's, less than 1% of the people are black. And, really I wanted to come out and just see what's it like to be that person. I realize that, there's probably a lot of us that, don't feel like that we're doing anything racist or we don't feel racist. Does the black community feel included? And I want to make sure, like everybody feels that this is a good place to live. And so we're just here asking stories, just finding out, what it's like to be a black person living in our community, and are we doing a good job to make sure that they're included, and are we making our community a better place to live for everyone?
So Quincy, growing up for me, I would definitely say my childhood was a little bit different than most. My father, who's black, he was born in Mississippi, grew up in Mississippi during the rioting, in the 40s, 50s. Ended up meeting my mom, who's white, in Chicago. And then they had me. And then I think it was about 1985, we came out to Quincy. And right away, I could tell that Quincy wasn't Chicago anymore. And so, meeting people wasn't as easy, just because they weren't always readily available. I had probably about 3 good friends growing up. One of them lived directly behind me. And from that friend, I ended up making a couple other friends. But it wasn't until I started getting involved in sports when I was in middle school where I started making a bunch more friends. And basically playing sports gave me the opportunity to, interact with the other kids that were, my age group. And they saw, that I was a good person. They saw that, I was funny and that we had a lot in common. So sports definitely opened up that avenue for me, which I probably wouldn't have got otherwise. And as I grew older, I think it was about junior high, I actually asked a couple of my good friends, why it took so long to become friends with them. And they told me straight up it was because I was black. And, they didn't know how to approach me or, just things they have heard, stereotypes they had heard. And passed down from generations, like their parents didn't necessarily want them hanging around a black kid. So, when I heard that, I was kind of in shock because I really didn't think that was an issue in this small town. In Quincy, there was, myself and my dad and maybe one other black person that would come and go. They would never really stay. So, and that really goes for this whole area, Ephrata, Moses Lake, Wenatchee. You could probably count the number of black people on 2 hands in this whole area. So over the years, it's obviously gotten a little bit more diverse, but when I was growing up, it was pretty difficult. I personally don't like the Confederate flag because I know what it used to stand for, and I think 95% of the people that have Confederate flags now are doing it because of that, or they're just being ignorant to what the symbolism is of it. It's definitely a symbolism of divide for me. Actually, I do have a story. When I was in high school, one of our teachers had a huge Confederate flag that he had posted up in his room. And so I would walk by the hall every single day staring at this Confederate flag. And for myself, I understood the meaning behind it. Again, my dad was from Mississippi, so I heard all those stories. My dad was actually, he didn't like white people for a very long time until, just because of the environment and the experiences he had, until a white person actually saved my dad's life. And that one instant is what at least got the wheels turning for my dad, that, other races, especially white people, weren't all bad. And so I love hearing that story when my dad has shared it to me before, because it really hits home for me. But anyway, going back to the Confederate flag and other symbolisms, it's, a lot of my friends will have like a Confederate flag sticker or, just other things. And I really don't think they're meaning to be insensitive about it. I just think that's, I don't want to say part of their culture, but it's kind of their image, so to speak, if that makes sense. So you might have a Confederate flag because you're carrying a rifle, or what other stigmas come with that. But yeah, seeing a Confederate flag, I absolutely do not like seeing those. Black Lives Matter movement, and I guess it would be considered a movement. It's important, and all lives are very important. Like, no one should get those two confused. I think it's just right now everything is being amplified with the police brutality, which I have my stories with that as well, so I definitely can relate. But right now the focus is on the police brutality of killing and hurting Black people. So that's why you're seeing Black Lives Matter. That's why we've been talking about it for years, because things really have not changed. So when you rebuttal with all lives matter, that's true, but I think it takes away from the true point of amplifying what's really going on right now between the Blacks and police in general. I used to really tense up whenever I would see a police officer, and this is stemming back all the way from high school. Even if I wasn't doing anything wrong, automatically I would just tense up. And a lot of that had to do with some of the experiences I've had, as well as what my dad has shared with his stories. But one thing specifically, when I was at WSU, I grew out my hair. And so I was starting to wear braids and cornrows. And it was night and day difference, my experience with having cornrows and braids to when I didn't have them. So I think I wore my cornrows for about 4 years or so, off and on. And never in my life had I been pulled over more times for doing nothing, having my car searched, telling me to get out of my car, being followed by police officers more so than when I had my cornrows. So I had enough of that harassment to where I actually decided to get rid of my cornrows and cut my hair short because I didn't want to deal with that anymore. But that was something that I dealt with a lot, when I had my hair long. So seeing a police officer now, I still get a little bit tense, but it's not as bad as it was when I was growing up. I mean, I understand what white privilege is. I think there could be a less derogatory sounding term for it, because it's really all it is really just ignorance. And when I say ignorance, I'm not calling someone ignorant again derogatorily. I'm saying it as in they're just not understanding or aware. But yeah, I mean, as like my mom, she has a different experience than my dad when she's going to the store versus what my dad is. And it just, hones back to the point is, you don't necessarily have to worry, if you're a white person or if you have light skin or whatever, like you don't necessarily have to worry or look over your shoulder, so to speak, when you're going to go about your daily business, versus if you're Black, especially in certain areas, or other races for that matter, you might be more prone to looking over your shoulder to making sure you're following everything by the T, and that you're not doing something that might draw attention to you unnecessarily. I used to travel all over the country. I did that for about 10 years. So when I would come back to Wenatchee and Quincy, I would see the towns themselves were growing up a little bit every time I would come back. And it is a little more diverse I'm more relaxed now when I come back versus when I was in college and I would come back. I wouldn't say my experience is necessarily different than it was then. And maybe it is just my, me being more mature now, but I'm more aware of my surroundings, so to speak, when I come back versus, the younger version of me. Don't ever feel not included with things. Again, growing up, I did feel that way simply because I guess, when you're young anyway, it's kind of hard to make friends, but finding out the reason why I was having trouble making friends when I was younger was definitely a shock to me. But yeah, as an adult, I definitely feel very included with things. I still, depending on where, what area of the country I'm in, I, still get looks. Or, if you're walking by an old lady, I'm just throwing that out there, walking by an old lady, she's gonna clutch her purse, maybe because I'm wearing a do-rag or a bandana. So I don't know how many times I've gone through a parking lot as an adult, and then all of a sudden I hear a door click as I'm walking by the car. So stuff like that gets annoying, but I understand, I guess. For this area specifically, it just, more diversity the better as far as I'm concerned. I really think it's just education, and that sounds cliche to say, but it's the truth. It's like, we need to start educating our kids when they're little and not, teach them divide or hatred. Like, there's no reason for that. That's not just in this area, this is all over the world. Like, we just need to teach love and empathy, and I think that's gonna change the world for the better. Again, growing up multiracial, biracial, like, I have never understood hating someone because of a skin color, like, or thinking differently of that group of people because of their skin color. And I thank my parents for that, because they're the ones that installed that in me. I could really see why people would in this area specifically, just because there is a lot of racial tension in general. It's not quite as bad as it used to be, but it's definitely still here, especially in the Quincy area. You have the whites and the Hispanics, and there's a lot of racial tension there, unnecessarily. So they say it, love your neighbor. So that's really what it comes down to as far as I'm concerned. I have a lot of friends and I made a post about this on my Facebook page, because I did have a cousin who was unarmed back in 2014. He was black, and he was shot by a white police officer. So that story and everything that's happening, that's close to my family. And then, it hurts when I see some of my friends, they just don't get it, or they just want to stir the pot. But it's like, they'll say, well, for every black, person that was murdered by a white police officer, why aren't we talking about this one kid that might be white who got killed by a black police officer, or something like that? And I get that, but the difference is that might be one of a few instances where this has been happening for generations. And so it's really awesome to see the protesting that's been happening around the country as of late. I'm not for the violence and the looting, but I understand it. We've been doing peaceful protesting for generations, and a lot of those peaceful protesting turned violent because the peaceful protesters are being attacked by police, or were back then.